The sun hung merciless in the bleached sky, beating down on the red earth like a blacksmith's hammer on hot iron. Wade Langston squinted against the glare, one hand shading his eyes as he scanned the horizon where the stagecoach road cut through the endless expanse of dried grass and sagebrush. In the distance, the mountains stood bare and unforgiving, their rocky faces stripped clean by wind and time. He'd been waiting since dawn, standing outside his modest homestead with its weathered wood siding and tin roof that creaked in the heat. The letter in his vest pocket had grown soft from handling, its edges worn from the countless times he'd pulled it out to read Margaret's gentle words. "I shall arrive on the Tuesday stage," she had written in her careful schoolteacher's hand. "How I long to see the ranch you've described and begin our life together." Wade shifted his weight, dust rising from his worn boots. 34 years had carved deep lines around his eyes, testament to countless days squinting into the prairie sun. His hands, rough as bark from years of working cattle and mending fences, trembled slightly as he reached for the letter again. He stopped himself. No sense wearing it out completely before she even arrived. The loneliness had crept up on him like winter frost, slow and inevitable. First, it was just the quiet evenings after the work was done, sitting on the porch with only the coyotes for company. Then came the dreams of voices in the house, of coffee brewing for two instead of one, of someone to share the small victories and defeats that marked a rancher's days. His neighbor, Old Pete, had suggested corresponding with women back east through the matrimonial advertisements. Wade had resisted at first, seemed unnatural, choosing a wife from letters like ordering supplies from a catalog, but the silence had worn him down like water on stone. Margaret's first letter had arrived 6 months ago. Unlike the others who'd written of their beauty or their accomplishments, she'd simply described her love of books, her work teaching children, and her yearning for the wide-open spaces she'd only read about. Something in her words had spoken to him, a quietness that matched his own, a gentle strength that suggested she could weather the hardships of frontier life without losing her softness. A dust cloud appeared on the horizon, growing larger as the stagecoach approached. Wade's heart hammered against his ribs like a wild mustang trying to break free. He smoothed down his hair, wished he'd thought to wear his newer shirt despite the heat. The brass locket he'd sent her 3 months ago, his mother's locket, would be around her neck. That's how he'd know her for certain. The coach rolled to a stop in a cloud of dust and creaking leather. The driver, a grizzled man named Elijah, whom Wade knew from town, tipped his hat. "Got your package? Langston," he called down with a grin that showed more gaps than teeth. Wade moved forward as the coach door opened. A woman emerged, but she was nothing like the gentle soul he'd imagined, where he'd expected soft brown hair pinned up proper. This woman wore hers loose and dark as midnight, where he'd pictured a modest traveling dress. She wore men's trousers and a duster that didn't quite hide the gun belt at her hip. But there, glinting in the afternoon sun at her throat, was his mother's locket. She stepped down with the fluid grace of a cat, her eyes green as bottle glass, taking in everything at once: the house, the barn, the empty corrals, and finally, Wade himself. Those eyes held none of the warmth he'd expected from Margaret's letters. They were cold, watchful, the eyes of someone who'd learned to see danger before it saw them. "Mr. Langston," she said, and even her voice was wrong husky, where Margaret's letters had suggested something sweeter, harder where they'd promised softness. "I trust you received my last letter about the delay." He hadn't received any such letter, but Wade nodded slowly, confusion warring with disappointment in his chest. "Miss Margaret," he said, the name feeling strange on his tongue now that he faced this dangerous-looking stranger. She smiled then, but it didn't reach those watchful eyes. "It's been a long journey. Perhaps we could continue this inside." She lifted a worn carpet bag from where the driver had set it, and Wade noticed her hands, not the soft hands of a schoolteacher, but hands that knew work, hands that had calluses in all the places his own did. "Of course," Wade managed. picking up her small trunk. It was heavier than he'd expected, and something inside shifted with a metallic sound. As he led her toward the house, his mind raced. The woman knew things only Margaret would know. She wore the locket. She knew his name. She referenced their correspondence. But everything else about her screamed danger like a rattlesnake's warning. Inside the small main room of his home, she set down her bag with obvious relief. Wade watched her survey the space, the stone fireplace he'd built himself, the simple furniture he'd carved during long winter evenings, the kitchen area with its wood stove and hand pump. Her expression gave nothing away. "You've done well for yourself," she said finally. "The house is just as you described in your letters." She moved to the window, peering out at the approaching dusk with those sharp eyes. "Very isolated. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles east. You said—" "That's right." Wade set her trunk down, noting again its unexpected weight. "Miss Margaret, I hope you don't think me forward, but you seem different from your letters." She turned from the window, and, for just a moment, something flickered across her face. Regret. It was gone before he could name it. "The frontier changes people. Mr. Langston. Surely you understand that." He did understand. The West had a way of stripping away softness, leaving only what was strong enough to survive. But this felt like more than that. This felt like deception, though he couldn't say why or how. "I'll show you to your room," he said finally. "I've prepared the back bedroom. Tomorrow we can go to town. See Reverend Morrison about the ceremony." "No rush," she said quickly. Too quickly. "I'd like a few days to settle in, if you don't mind. The journey was difficult." Wade nodded. Though unease coiled in his stomach like a snake, he showed her to the small room he'd carefully prepared, with its fresh whitewash and the quilt his mother had made. She thanked him with that same distant courtesy, and he left her to settle in. As he prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread, Wade's mind churned. Nothing added up right. The woman in his back room moved like someone accustomed to danger, spoke like someone choosing each word careful as picking steps across thin ice. And when she'd set down her bag, when she'd shifted her weight stepping down from the coach, he'd noticed something that made his blood run cold despite the lingering heat. There on the heel of her left boot, barely visible but unmistakable to a man who'd butchered enough cattle to know, a dark stain that looked suspiciously like blood, fresh enough that it hadn't quite dried to black in the desert heat. Wade Langston had waited months for a gentle bride to share his quiet life. Instead, he'd gotten a woman who wore guns and carried secrets as heavy as the trunk in her room, as the sun bled red across the western sky. He wondered what kind of trouble had just stepped off that stagecoach and into his life. The peaceful future he'd imagined seemed to shimmer and fade like a mirage in the desert heat, replaced by something unknown and dangerous. He touched the coffee pot on the stove, thinking of all those mornings he'd imagined sharing breakfast with his bride. Now, as darkness crept across the prairie and the woman who called herself Margaret moved quietly in the back room, Wade wondered if he'd live to see many more sunrises at all. Dawn broke gray and uneasy over the prairie, the kind of morning that made horses skittish and set dogs to whining. Wade had been up since before first light, unable to shake the feeling that something was coming across that vast emptiness. He stood at the kitchen window, coffee growing cold in his hands, watching the woman who called herself Margaret move about the yard. She'd risen even earlier than him, and now she checked the horizon with the systematic attention of a soldier on a watch. The sound came first, the distant thunder of hooves that every frontier dweller learned to read like scripture. 3 riders, Wade judged, moving fast but not racing, moving with purpose. The woman heard it too. He saw her shoulders tense, saw her hand drift toward the pistol she hadn't bothered to hide this morning. She turned toward the house, and their eyes met through the window. In that moment, her carefully constructed mask slipped entirely. This wasn't Margaret the school teacher looking back at him, but someone else entirely, someone haunted, hunted, dangerous as a cornered wolf. The riders crested the low rise to the east, silhouetted against the brightening sky. Even at this distance, Wade could see they rode with the easy confidence of men who'd spent their lives in the saddle. Men who wore their guns low and loose. Men who meant trouble. The woman was beside him now, having moved inside silent as smoke. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice stripped of yesterday's pretense. "Reckon you do," Wade replied, setting down his coffee cup. His own rifle leaned in the corner, and he measured the distance to it with his eyes. "My name isn't Margaret." The words came out flat, matter of fact. "It's Dixie Hargrove." Wade felt something cold settle in his chest. "And Margaret, dead." Her green eyes never left the approaching riders. "They killed her 2 weeks ago in Denver. Shot her down in the street when they realized she wouldn't tell them where I was." The riders were close enough now that Wade could make out details. The one in the lead was a big man, black-bearded, riding a gray horse that probably cost more than Wade's entire ranch. His companions flanked him like wolves following their alpha lean, alert, deadly. "You took her letters," Wade said, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. "Her identity." "I took her ticket." Dixie's laugh was bitter as bad coffee. "She was dying in my arms, blood soaking into the dirt, and she pressed that stage ticket into my hand. 'He's a good man,' she said. 'He'll keep you safe.'" "Oh." Wade's throat felt tight, somewhere in Denver. The gentle woman he'd corresponded with lay in a grave, her dreams of a new life buried with her. And in his house stood her friend, or perhaps her sister. Given the similar features, he could now see beneath the harder edges. "Who are they?" he asked, nodding toward the riders who'd stopped just outside rifle range. The one in front is Marcus Crenshaw. Owns half the cattle operations in Colorado. Or at least the paperwork says he does. The other two are his dogs. Men who'd sell their mothers for silver. And they want you dead because I know what he really owns. Because I've got proof that those cattle wearing his brand were stolen from honest ranchers. That he's been blaming the thefts on Apache raids, stirring up trouble to cover his tracks." Her hand moved to her chest, pressing against something beneath her shirt. Papers, names, evidence that could see him hanged. The lead rider, Crenshaw, nudged his horse forward, stopping just within shouting distance. "Miss Hargrove." His voice carried across the morning air, smooth as oil and just as slippery. "We've had ourselves quite the chase. Time to end it, don't you think?" Dixie stepped toward the door, but Wade's hand on her arm stopped her. "My house," he said quietly. "My land. Let me handle the talking." He stepped out onto the porch, very aware of the rifle he'd left inside. "Morning, gentlemen. You're on Langston property. State your business." Crenshaw smiled, the kind of smile that never touched the eyes. "Wade Langston, I presume I hear congratulations are in order. Taking a bride is a blessed thing." His gaze shifted to where Dixie stood in the doorway. "Though I'd be careful about accepting damaged goods. Man chooses his own wife." Wade replied evenly. "Don't reckon that's anyone else's concern." "It is when that woman's a thief and a liar." Crenshaw leaned forward in his saddle. "She's got something belongs to me. You seem like a sensible man. Langston, stand aside. Let us conclude our business, and you can go back to your quiet life. Maybe even find yourself a real bride instead of this pretender." Wade felt Dixie tense behind him, felt the weight of the choice pressing down like a millstone. The sensible thing would be to step aside. He didn't know this woman, owed her nothing beyond basic human decency. Margaret, the real Margaret, was dead, and nothing he did here would bring her back. But he thought of those letters, of a gentle woman's dreams of a new life, of her dying words about him being a good man. He thought of Dixie's eyes when she'd spoken of her friend dying in the street, of the blood on her boots that might well have been from kneeling beside Margaret's body. "Seems to me," Wade said slowly, "a man claiming property ought to have proof of ownership. You got papers on this supposed theft?" Crenshaw's smile disappeared. I've got 3 men with guns. That's all the proof I need. You're forgetting whose land you're on. Wade kept his voice conversational, though his muscles coiled tight as fence wire. Out here, a man's home is his castle. You ride onto my property making threats. That makes you the lawbreaker. One of Crenshaw's men, a rat-faced fellow with dead eyes, shifted in his saddle, hand moving toward his gun. Let me ventilate this farmer. Boss, save us all some time. Easy, boss. Crenshaw never took his eyes off Wade. Mister, Langston's just being protective of his woman. Natural thing, but misguided. He raised his voice slightly. Miss Hargrove. Margaret, whatever you're calling yourself today, you've got 1 minute to come out, or things get unpleasant for your protector here. Wade heard Dixie move behind him, heard the distinctive click of a hammer being cocked. You want me, Crenshaw? She called out. Come and take me, but you'll bleed for it. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Wade could feel it all balanced on a knife's edge, violence waiting to explode like powder touched by spark. His mind raced, calculating angles and odds. 3 armed men against him and a woman he didn't know, couldn't trust, but who might be the only witness to murders and thefts that had destroyed innocent lives. Minute's up, Crenshaw said softly. What happened next would replay in Wade's mind for years to come. Voss went for his gun, fast as a rattler's strike. But Dixie was faster, stepping around Wade and firing in one smooth motion. Voss tumbled from his saddle, clutching his shoulder. The morning erupted in gunfire. Wade dove back through the doorway. Grabbing his rifle as bullets splintered the door frame, Dixie was already moving, overturning the heavy kitchen table for cover. So much for my quiet bride, Wade muttered, lever-actioning around into the chamber. Margaret would have made you happy. Dixie shouted over the gunfire. She would have given you everything you wanted, peace, children, gentle evenings by the fire. Yeah, Wade fired through the window, driving Crenshaw's men to cover behind the water trough. Well, she's not here, you are. It was a statement of fact, but something in how he said it made Dixie look at him sharply. In the middle of a gunfight, with death whistling through the air around them, their eyes met and held. Wade saw surprise there, and something else, a flicker of hope, maybe, or recognition. We, he said, echoing her earlier word, we handle this together. She nodded once, sharp and decisive, together. The sun climbed higher, turning the morning from gray to gold. As Wade Langston and the woman who wasn't Margaret faced down the demons of her past. Whatever happened next, Wade knew his quiet life was over. But looking at Dixie Hargrove, fierce and frightened and magnificent in her defiance, he found he didn't mourn it as much as he'd expected. Sometimes a man didn't get what he'd planned for. Sometimes he got what he needed instead. The gunfire died away as Crenshaw and his remaining men retreated to better positions behind a cluster of rocks 50 yards from the house. Voss lay groaning in the dust, his shoulder bleeding through his fingers. In the sudden quiet, Wade could hear his own heartbeat and Dixie's measured breathing beside him. Night was coming. Already the sun hung low, painting long shadows across the yard. The desert cold would creep in soon, and with it, advantages would shift. Wade knew every inch of his land in the dark. Crenshaw's men didn't. We need to talk, Dixie said, her voice low. She kept her eyes on the window, watching for movement. You deserve to know what you're fighting for. Seems clear enough, Wade replied, checking his ammunition. Man tried to gun us down in my own home. It's bigger than that. She reached inside her shirt and pulled out an oilskin packet, worn soft from concealment. This is what they want. This is what Margaret died protecting. Wade took the packet, unfolding it carefully. Inside were documents, bills of sale, shipping manifests, bank drafts, names, dates, figures. His eyes widened as he began to understand the scope of it. Sweet Jesus, he breathed, There's thousands of head here. 40,000, near as I can figure. Dixie's laugh was bitter. Stolen from ranchers across 3 territories. When the owners complained, Crenshaw's tame sheriff would investigate and blame it on Apache raids. Convenient. Wasn't it stir up Indian trouble? Get the army involved, and meanwhile, the cattle disappear into Crenshaw's herds. Wade studied a map marked with raid locations, his stomach turning. Some of these places, whole families were wiped out. Because dead ranchers don't file complaints. Dixie's green eyes were hard as jade. My father was one of them. Small spread up near Pueblo. Crenshaw's men came in the night, made it look like Apaches, even left arrows. But I knew better. My father had friends among the Apache. They'd never have touched our place. The wind picked up, rattling through the broken windows. Wade could see Crenshaw's men building a small fire behind their rocks. They were settling in for a siege. How'd you get these papers? I worked for him. The admission came hard. Wade could tell. After my father died, I had nothing. Crenshaw was hiring clerks for his Denver office. Thought a woman would be good for appearance's sake, respectable. You know I kept my head down, played dumb, and waited. Took me 2 years to get access to these records. And Margaret? My roommate at the boarding house. Sweet as spring honey, that one. Always talking about her correspondence with a rancher. About starting fresh. Dixie's voice caught slightly. I never meant for her to get involved, but when Crenshaw discovered the missing documents, when his men came, she was wearing my coat, in the dark. They thought... Wade set the papers aside and looked at her, really looked at her. Beneath the hard edges and watchful eyes, he saw the grief, the guilt, the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who'd been running too long. She gave you her ticket, he said. It wasn't a question. With her dying breath, said I should take her place, that you'd protect me. I think she knew she was dying anyway. Wanted something good to come from it. Dixie met his gaze. I'm sorry. You deserved your gentle bride, not this mess. Wade was quiet for a long moment, watching the fire glow in the gathering darkness. You know what I was thinking when I wrote those letters? I was thinking about silence, about how quiet this place gets, how a man can go weeks hearing nothing but wind and cattle. I wanted someone to fill that silence with soft words and laughter. And instead you got gunfire. Instead, I got truth. He looked at her sideways. Those letters Margaret sent, full of pretty words about sunsets and poetry? Nice enough, but looking back, they were like sugar water, sweet but no substance. You blow in here with your guns and your secrets, and in one day you've told me more truth than months of correspondence did. Truth gets people killed out here. So does lies, at least with truth. A man knows what he's dying for. A shout from outside interrupted them. Langston, getting dark out here. This ends one of 2 ways. You send out the woman, or we burn you out. Your choice. Wade moved to the window, careful to stay in shadow. Crenshaw, you're a businessman. Right, let's talk business. What's the woman worth to you? Silence. Then, more than you've got, farmer. Maybe, but here's what I'm thinking. You kill us. Those papers still exist, and I'm betting she's smart enough to have copies stashed somewhere, letters ready to mail if she doesn't check in. That about right. Miss Hargrove. Dixie caught on quick. 3 lawyers, she called out. Denver, Santa Fe, and Kansas City. They've got instructions and enough evidence to start asking questions if I disappear. It was a lie, but Crenshaw couldn't know that for certain. Wade pressed the advantage. So you burn us out. You've got 2 bodies and a whole lot of questions coming your way, or we can all walk away from this. You're bluffing. Maybe. You willing to bet your empire on it? The fire crackled in the distance. Wade could feel Dixie watching him, could sense her surprise at his maneuvering. He kept his expression neutral, though his mind raced. They needed to buy time, needed to shift the odds somehow. Here's what I know. Crenshaw finally called back. I know that woman's got no friends left, no lawyers, no insurance. I know you're just a lonely rancher who got tangled up in something too big for him. Last chance. Langston, send her out. Wade felt Dixie's hand on his arm. He's right, she whispered. This isn't your fight. I should go. Maybe I can lead them away. Buy you time to... No. The word came out harder than he intended. You don't understand something about lonely ranchers. Miss Hargrove, we're stubborn as hell. Man spends years fighting this land. Weather, isolation. He doesn't learn to quit easy. This is different. This is a man protecting what's under his roof. That's not different at all. He met her eyes in the dim light. Margaret's dead. Can't change that. But I can honor what she tried to do with her last breath. I can finish what she started. Dixie stared at him for a long moment. Then something shifted in her expression. The wariness eased, replaced by something Wade couldn't quite name. You're not what I expected. Wade Langston. Likewise, Dixie Hargrove. She smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, hinting at who she might have been before loss and vengeance carved those hard lines around her eyes. So what's our play? We can't stay pinned down forever. Wade moved to his rifle, checking the action. Those boys are city killers, used to back alleys and ambushes. This is my ground. Come full dark. We'll see who knows the desert better. You're talking about taking the fight to them. I'm talking about ending this before they bring more men. Crenshaw's got deep pockets. He can afford to be patient. We can't. Dixie nodded slowly, understanding dawning. You know this land in the dark. Every rock, every gully. There's an old Apache trail runs behind those rocks where they're camped. Leads up to a ledge. Good shooting position. Dangerous. Everything about this is dangerous. Question is, do we die hiding or fighting? She answered by checking her pistol, her movements efficient and practiced. When do we move? Hour after full dark. Let them settle in, get comfortable. They'll keep one man on watch, probably spell each other through the night. Wade paused, studying her. You sure about this? I move quiet. But I wasn't always a clerk. Langston, girl grows up on a small ranch. She learns to hunt. My daddy taught me to track elk before I could write my name. Her smile was sharp as a blade. Crenshaw made one mistake. He let me get angry and patient. That's a dangerous combination. Wade found himself smiling back. Remind me not to get on your bad side. Too late for that. You already gave me shelter in Crenshaw's book. That makes you as guilty as me. Then I guess we'd better make sure he doesn't get to write the ending. Outside, darkness settled over the desert like a blanket. The fire behind the rocks grew brighter, a beacon that would ruin their night vision. Amateur mistake, Wade thought. City men depending on light to keep the monsters at bay, not realizing that in the desert, darkness was just another tool for those who knew how to use it. He looked at Dixie, this dangerous woman who'd arrived wearing a dead friend's identity, carrying secrets worth killing for. Not the quiet bride he'd expected, but perhaps the partner he needed for what was coming. Get some rest, he told her. We move in an hour. She nodded, but her hand caught his sleeve as he turned away. Wade, thank you. Margaret was right about you being a good man. We'll see if you still think that come morning, he replied. But something warm unfurled in his chest at her words. As they prepared for the night's dark work, Wade realized that somewhere between the morning's deception and the evening's truth, he'd stopped thinking of her as an intruder and started thinking of her as his to protect. Not the gentle bride he'd dreamed of, but something fiercer and more real. The desert waited, patient and unforgiving. Soon, they would venture into its darkness to face men who killed for profit and power. But for this moment, in his shot-up house with danger all around, Wade Langston felt less alone than he had in years. The moon was a silver coin in the sky when they slipped from the house, moving like shadows across familiar ground. Wade led the way. Every step placed with the certainty of a man who'd walked this path 1,000 times. Behind him, Dixie moved with surprising grace, her breathing controlled, her footfalls nearly silent. They circled wide, using a dry wash that cut through the property. The ancient Apache trail was little more than a suggestion in the rock, but Wade's feet found it surely. As they climbed, he could hear Crenshaw's men below, the murmur of voices, the occasional harsh laugh, overconfident. It would cost them. They reached the ledge just as clouds began to drift across the moon. Perfect timing. In the intermittent darkness, Wade could make out 3 figures around the fire. One stood watch, but he was looking toward the house, not the rocks above. Dixie touched his shoulder, pointed. There, horses picketed beyond the firelight. Smart thinking. Without horses, any survivors would be trapped come morning. Wade nodded, impressed again by her tactical mind. He'd expected to teach a frightened woman to shoot. Instead, he'd found a partner who thought 3 moves ahead. They settled into position, checking sightlines. Wade noticed how Dixie braced her pistol, steady as bedrock. No tremor, no hesitation. Whatever innocence she'd once possessed had been burned away by loss and necessity. He recognized the transformation. The West did that to people, stripped them down to what was essential for survival. "Crenshaw's mine?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Wade understood. This was personal for her, the culmination of 2 years' patient planning. He'd take the others, give her the satisfaction of facing the man who'd orchestrated her father's death. The attack began with Wade's rifle shot, dropping the sentry before he could shout a warning. Chaos erupted below as the remaining men scrambled for cover, but they were caught in the open, firelight destroying their night vision. Dixie's pistol barked twice, deliberately missing Crenshaw but herding him toward the horses. She wanted him running, wanted to chase him down. Wade covered her descent, his rifle keeping Crenshaw's last man pinned behind inadequate cover. What followed was brutal in its efficiency. The man behind the rock tried to flank them, not realizing Wade had already shifted position. The rifle spoke once more, and another of Crenshaw's killers fell to the desert floor. But in the confusion, no one noticed Voss. The wounded man had been playing dead, waiting for his chance. As Dixie pursued Crenshaw toward the horses, Voss rose from the shadows behind her, pistol raised despite his bloodied shoulder. Wade saw it unfold as if in slow motion. The gun lifting, Dixie exposed. No time to shout a warning. He moved without thinking, launching himself from the ledge. The impact sent all 3 of them tumbling, Wade, Dixie, and Voss in a tangle of limbs and weapons. Voss's gun went off, the muzzle flash blinding in the darkness. Wade felt the bullet's hot passage, felt Dixie twist beneath him, heard her sharp intake of breath. Then his fist connected with Voss's jaw, and the man went limp. Dixie, Wade rolled off her, hands searching for wounds. "I'm fine," she gasped, but he could see the dark stain spreading across her side. "Crenshaw, don't let him—" The thunder of hooves cut her off. Crenshaw was fleeing, spurring his horse desperately into the night. Wade raised his rifle, but the angle was wrong, the distance too great. The cattle baron disappeared into the darkness, the sound of his escape fading into silence. "Let him go," Dixie said, pressing a hand to her side. "We've got bigger problems." She was right. In the flickering firelight, Wade could see riders approaching from the east. Many riders. His heart sank. Crenshaw must have had reinforcements waiting. But as they drew closer, he saw the glint of badges in the firelight. Federal marshals, a full dozen of them, spreading out with practiced efficiency. Wade Langston, the lead marshal, a weathered man with steel-gray whiskers, surveyed the scene. "Marshal Tom Brennan, we've been tracking Crenshaw's bunch for 3 days. Seems you've done some of our work for us." Wade helped Dixie to her feet, keeping pressure on her wound. "How did you—" "The lady sent us a telegram from Denver before she fled," Brennan explained, dismounting. Took us a while to verify her claims and gather men. Should have been here sooner." Dixie laughed weakly. "Told you I was patient, just didn't mention all of my insurance policies." The marshals efficiently secured the scene, 2 of them seeing to Dixie's wound while others documented the bodies. Wade heard Brennan organizing pursuit of Crenshaw, sending his best trackers after the fleeing man. "He won't get far," the marshal assured them. "Not with half the federal service looking for him now. Miss Hargrove's evidence made sure of that." As the immediate danger passed, Wade found himself kneeling beside Dixie. The wound wasn't as bad as he'd feared. The bullet had passed through her side. Missing anything vital. Painful, but she'd recover. "You saved my life," she said, looking up at him with those green eyes. "Threw yourself right off that ledge." "Seemed like the thing to do at the time," Wade replied, trying for lightness despite the fear still coursing through him. "The loner cowboy expected a quiet bride," she murmured, echoing his thoughts from that morning that seemed a lifetime ago. "But the twin brides rode into his life instead." Wade frowned, not understanding. "Twin brides?" "Margaret and me." Her smile was sad and knowing. "The gentle ghost you were expecting, and the broken survivor who showed up in her place. You got us both. In a way, her dreams brought me here, and my demons followed." He considered this, watching the marshals work, feeling the strange turns his life had taken in a single day. Maybe that's how it was meant to be. Margaret's kindness led you to safety, and your courage brought justice. Seems like both brides had their part to play. Poetic for a rancher, Dixie observed. "You'd be surprised what a man thinks about during all those quiet evenings." He helped her sit up as a marshal approached with medical supplies. "What will you do now? When this is over?" She was quiet for a moment, accepting the marshal's ministrations with stoic grace. "I don't know. Been so focused on revenge, on justice. Never thought about after." "Well," Wade said carefully, "that room's still made up, and I've still got coffee for 2 getting cold every morning." She looked at him sharply. "Oh, you can't be serious. After all this, I'm not Margaret, Wade. I'm not gentle or quiet or any of the things you wanted." "No," he agreed. "You're not, but you're brave and loyal and tougher than rawhide. Man could do worse for a partner." "Partner," she repeated, testing the word. "Not bride." "Maybe both, in time, if you're interested. But partner first. Equal stakes, equal say. The West is hard enough without facing it alone." Marshal Brennan interrupted before she could respond. "We'll need you both to come to town. Give statements. Doctors should look at that wound properly, too." As they prepared to leave, Dixie caught Wade's sleeve. "That first night, you noticed the blood on my boots. Why didn't you turn me out?" Wade thought about it as he helped her onto a borrowed horse. "Guess I recognize something in your eyes. Same thing I see in the mirror some mornings. Loss, loneliness, the look of someone who's been carrying weight too long." He swung up onto his own mount. "Besides, seemed like you needed help. And Margaret, the real Margaret, thought you deserved it. That was enough for me." They rode toward town in the pre-dawn darkness, the marshals surrounding them like a protective honor guard. Behind them, Wade's shot-up house stood empty but not abandoned. They'd be back to repair the damage, to build something new from the wreckage of this violent night. "Partners," Dixie said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "I like the sound of that. But Wade, I should warn you, I'm not an easy woman to live with. I've got rough edges that might never smooth out." "Good thing I'm not looking for easy," Wade replied. "Had enough of quiet to last me. Maybe it's time for something more interesting." She laughed, the sound carrying across the desert like water after drought. Despite the pain of her wound, despite the violence behind them and the uncertainty ahead, that laugh held hope. The sun was rising as they reached town, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Wade looked at the woman riding beside him, not the bride he'd expected, but perhaps the one he needed. The twin brides had indeed ridden into his life, one in spirit, one in flesh, both leaving marks that would last forever. As they dismounted at the doctor's office, Dixie stumbled slightly, and Wade caught her arm. For a moment they stood close, her weight against him, and he could smell gunpowder and sage in her hair. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing me, for standing with me, for being the man Margaret said you were." "Thank you," he replied, "for bringing truth to my doorstep, even if it came with bullets." Marshal Brennan cleared his throat, reminding them they weren't alone. But as they separated to enter the doctor's office, Wade caught the smile on Dixie's face. Not the hard, dangerous smile of Crenshaw's hunter, but something softer, more real. The quiet bride he dreamed of was gone, a ghost of correspondence and wishes. In her place stood a woman forged by loss and tempered by justice, offering partnership instead of subservience, strength instead of silence. Wade Langston had expected one kind of life and gotten another entirely. As he watched the doctor tend to Dixie's wound, as he gave his statement to the marshals, as he began to envision a future neither quiet nor simple, he found he wouldn't have it any other way. The doctor's office in town was small but clean, smelling of carbolic and whiskey. Dixie lay on the narrow cot, her face pale but composed as doctor. Morrison worked on her wound. Wade sat nearby, hat in his hands, watching the steady rise and fall of her breathing. "You're lucky," the doctor said, wrapping fresh bandages around her middle. "Inch to the left and we'd be having a different conversation. As it is, you'll need rest and care for several weeks." "I've had worse," Dixie murmured, but Wade caught the tightness around her eyes, the way her hands gripped the cot's edges. Dr. Morrison, a thin man with gentle hands and knowing eyes, packed his instruments. "I'm sure you have, Miss, but that doesn't mean you should treat this lightly. Infection's a killer out here, sometimes worse than bullets." Wade stood as the doctor finished. "She'll have proper care. I'll see to it." The doctor glanced between them, a small smile playing at his lips. "I heard you were expecting a bride, Langston. Seems you got more than you bargained for." "Story of my life, Doc," Wade replied, surprised to find he meant it without bitterness. After Morrison left, Wade helped Dixie sit up. The morning light through the window caught the red in her dark hair, making it glow like embers. She looked vulnerable in a way she hadn't even while bleeding, as if the doctor's care had stripped away some of her armor. "You don't have to take care of me," she said quietly. "I can find a room at the boarding house until I'm healed." "And then what? Move on to the next town? The next fight?" Wade pulled his chair closer. "That what you want?" She was quiet for a long moment, fingers tracing the edge of the bandage through her torn shirt. "I've been running or fighting for so long. I'm not sure I remember how to do anything else. My father," her voice caught, "he used to say I was like a Mustang. Too wild to settle, too stubborn to break." "Mustangs can be gentled," Wade said. "Just takes patience and the right touch." "You offering to try?" There was challenge in her voice, but underneath it, something else. Hope, maybe, or fear. "I'm offering a place to heal. Rest of it, we can figure out as we go." A knock at the door interrupted them. Marshal Brennan entered, followed by two of his men. His expression was grim. "Thought you should know," he said without preamble. "We caught up with Crenshaw about 10 miles out. He didn't surrender peacefully." Dixie straightened, wincing at the movement. "He's dead." "Dead as yesterday's news. Tried to shoot his way past my men." Brennan shook his head. "Fool move, but I guess he knew what waited for him at the end of a rope." Wade watched Dixie's face as she absorbed this news. He expected satisfaction, maybe even joy. Instead, he saw something deflate in her, like a sail losing wind. 2 years, she whispered. 2 years of planning, waiting, working toward this moment, and now it's over, Wade said gently. Justice is done. Is it? She looked up at him, green eyes bright with unshed tears. My father's still dead. Margaret's still dead. All those families Crenshaw destroyed, none of them are coming back. Marshal Brennan cleared his throat. There's more. Miss Hargrove, with Crenshaw dead and your evidence in hand, we're moving on his whole organization. Already got warrants for 12 men across 3 territories. The prosecutor says your testimony will be crucial. More trials, Dixie said flatly. More violence. More justice. Brennan corrected. You've given us the tools to clean up a cancer that's been eating at honest folk for years. That matters. Miss, that saves lives. He set a leather portfolio on the side table. These are copies of your statements. The prosecutor will be in touch about trial dates. For now, you've done your part. Rest, heal. He touched his hat brim. Ma'am, Langston. After the marshals left, the room felt too quiet. Wade could hear the bustle of the town outside, wagons creaking, horses neighing, the distant ring of the blacksmith's hammer. Normal sounds of life continuing, oblivious to the drama that had played out in the desert. I don't know who I am without an enemy to fight, Dixie admitted suddenly. It's been my purpose for so long. Wade considered his words carefully. Day I wrote that first letter to Margaret, I was sitting at my table, staring at a blank page for near an hour. Didn't know how to describe myself beyond the work. Rancher, cattleman, like that was all there was to me. He met her eyes. Maybe we both need to figure out who we are beyond our purposes. Together, the word came out small, uncertain. If you're willing, ranch work isn't easy, especially with that wound, but there's something to be said for honest labor. Working with your hands, building instead of destroying. Dixie was quiet, but he could see her thinking, weighing options, finally. She spoke. I need to tell you about Denver. All of it. You don't owe me. Yes, I do. If we're going to try this partnership, or whatever we're calling it, you deserve the whole truth. So she told him about finding her father's body, staged to look like an Apache raid, about selling everything she had to get to Denver, taking any work she could find until Crenshaw's company hired her, about the months of careful planning, memorizing routines, earning trust, about the night she finally got into the private files and found the evidence that would damn him. I was leaving the office when they caught me, she said, her voice steady but distant. Should have been more careful, but I was so close, they chased me through the streets. I ran to the boarding house, thinking I could grab my things and disappear. But Margaret... Her voice broke then. Wade reached for her hand, and she gripped it tight. She was wearing my blue coat, the one with the fur collar I'd lent her because hers was being mended. In the dark, in the rain, they thought she was me. Shot her down on the boarding house steps. Tears ran freely now. She was going to meet the evening post, probably had another letter to send to you. Instead, she died for my sins. Not your sins, Wade said firmly. Crenshaw's sins. You were seeking justice. And Margaret paid the price. She wiped her face with her free hand. She pressed that ticket into my hand, told me to take her place, that you were a good man who'd keep me safe. I think she knew she was dying, wanted something good to come from it. And it has justice for dozens of families, a criminal empire brought down. At what cost? She looked at him with haunted eyes. That's not for us to weigh, Wade said. We can't change what happened. We can only choose what comes next. Dixie squeezed his hand, then slowly released it. I need you to know. I'm not her. I'll never be the gentle bride you were expecting. I've got blood on my hands and ghosts in my head. Some nights I wake up reaching for a gun that isn't there. Some days I can't stand to be touched, can't stand kindness because it feels like something I don't deserve. We've all got our ghosts, Wade replied. Mine just holler different names in the dark. She studied him then, really looked at him. What happened to you? Wade Langston. What made a man choose isolation over companionship? It was his turn to be quiet, to weigh trust against old pain. Had a wife once, Sarah, married young, full of dreams about building something together. Typhoid took her our second winter, along with the baby she was carrying. After that, easier to be alone than risk that kind of loss again. But you wrote to Margaret. 5 years of empty evenings will drive a man to do things he swore he wouldn't. Figured a mail-order arrangement would be safer, less chance of... He gestured vaguely. Getting too attached. And now I've got a woman bleeding in my spare room who faced down killers without flinching. Makes a man reconsider what he thought he knew about safe. Dixie laughed, then gasped as the movement pulled at her wound. We're a pair, aren't we? The grieving widower and the revenge-bent orphan. Could be worse, Wade said. Could be boring. A soft knock interrupted them. The door opened to reveal a familiar face. Mrs. Hutchins from the general store, carrying a bundle of clothing. Heard there was a lady in need, she said briskly, eyeing Dixie's blood-stained and torn clothing. Can't have you going about looking like you've been wrestling wildcats, even if that's near enough the truth. She laid out a simple brown skirt and white blouse, along with undergarments and a shawl. Nothing fancy, but clean and proper. Mr. Langston, I trust you'll step outside while the lady changes. Wade stood quickly, face reddening. Of course, I'll, go check on the horses. As he reached the door, Dixie called his name. Wade, thank you for everything. I know I'm not what you wanted, but you're what showed up, he said simply, starting to think that's better than what I wanted. He stepped outside into the morning sun, breathing deep of the crisp air. The town was fully awake now, people going about their business. Several nodded to him, and he saw curiosity in their glances. Word traveled fast in a small town. By noon, everyone would know some version of the night's events. Let them talk, he thought. The truth was stranger than any gossip they could conjure. The loner cowboy who'd expected a quiet bride and got a gunfighting woman with revenge in her heart instead. The twin brides, one of spirit and one of flesh, who'd ridden into his life and changed everything in a single day. Through the window, he could see Mrs. Hutchins helping Dixie into the new clothes, careful of her bandages. The sight of her being tended to, being cared for, did something to his chest that he couldn't quite name. Not love, too soon for that, but possibility, maybe the chance of something neither of them had dared hope for. When he was finally allowed back inside, Dixie was dressed in the simple clothes, her hair pinned up properly for the first time since she'd arrived. She looked younger, softer, though her eyes still held that watchful gleam. Better? She asked, smoothing the skirt self-consciously. Different, he said honestly. But then, I'm learning different might be exactly what we both need. The afternoon sun slanted through the doctor's window as Marshal Brennan returned, his expression grave. Behind him stood two of his deputies, hands resting on their gun butts with the casual readiness of men who lived with danger. We've got a problem, Brennan said without preamble. Parker and Voss, Crenshaw's surviving men. They broke custody during transfer, killed 2 deputies, and disappeared into the Badlands. Dixie's face went pale beneath her tan. They'll come for me. That's our thinking, Brennan confirmed. These boys aren't the type to forgive and forget. With Crenshaw dead, you're the only target left for their revenge. Wade felt his jaw tighten. Just when it seemed they might have found some peace, violence circled back like a hungry wolf. What do you suggest, Marshal? We can put guards on you, but my men are spread thin cleaning up Crenshaw's organization. Other option is to move Miss Hargrove somewhere safe until we track them down. Running again, Dixie said flatly. Always running. Surviving, Brennan corrected. No shame in that. Wade stood, decision crystallizing in his mind. There's a third option. We make them come to us, but on our terms. The marshal raised an eyebrow. You've got something in mind. Devil's Rock. It's a box canyon about 8 miles north of my place. One way in, high walls all around. My father used to winter cattle there, good grass, natural shelter. If we're going to face them, better to choose our ground. You're talking about using Miss Hargrove as bait. Brennan's disapproval was evident. I'm talking about ending this properly, Wade replied. Those boys won't stop. Even if we run, they'll keep hunting. Better to face it head on. I agree. Dixie's voice was steady despite her pallor. I'm tired of looking over my shoulder. If they want me, let them come. Brennan studied them both, then sighed. It's not the worst plan I've heard. We could position men on the canyon walls, control the engagement, but it's risky. Everything about this has been risky, Dixie pointed out. At least this way. We choose when and where. They spent the next hour planning. Brennan would gather his available men while Wade and Dixie returned to the ranch to prepare. The marshal insisted on sending 2 deputies with them as protection. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Morrison pulled Wade aside. That wound needs care, he said quietly. Too much activity could tear it open again. She's tougher than she looks, but she's not invincible. I'll watch her, Wade promised. See that you do. And Langston, whatever you're planning, remember, dead heroes make poor husbands. The ride back to the ranch was slow, accommodating Dixie's injury. She rode side-saddle at the doctor's insistence, which clearly frustrated her. Wade could see her fighting the pain, maintaining her pride even as sweat beaded on her forehead. We could stop, he offered as they crossed a small creek. Rest a bit. I'm fine, she said through gritted teeth. Had worse in Denver. You keep saying that. Doesn't make it true. She gave him a sharp look. You always this protective of your partners? Only the ones who've been shot saving my life, he replied. Call me peculiar that way. That earned him a small smile. They continued in companionable silence, the deputies trailing at a respectful distance. As they crested the rise overlooking his ranch, Wade saw Dixie's expression soften. It's beautiful, she said quietly. I didn't really see it yesterday, what with the gunfire and all. Wade looked at his land through her eyes, the house he'd built with his own hands, the barn that had taken 2 summers to complete, the corrals where he'd gentled countless horses. It wasn't much compared to the spreads of bigger ranchers, but it was his. Could be ours, he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. Dixie turned to look at him. You meant what you said about partnership. I don't say things I don't mean. Question is, what do you want? She was quiet for a long moment, watching a hawk circle overhead. I want to stop running. Stop fighting. Want to wake up one morning without checking for threats. Go to sleep without one hand on a gun. She met his eyes. But I don't know if I can. It's been my life for so long. Then we take it one day at a time, Wade said, starting with getting through tomorrow alive. They reached the house as the sun touched the western hills. The damage from the morning's gunfight was evident. Broken windows, splintered door frame, bullet holes pocking the walls. But the structure stood solid, defiant. Going to need some work, Dixie observed. Everything worth having does, Wade replied. Inside, while the deputies took up watch positions, Wade helped Dixie settle in the main room. He brewed coffee and started preparing a simple meal, noting how she watched his every movement with those sharp green eyes. You're different than I expected, she said finally. When I read Margaret's letters, the way she described you, I thought you'd be simpler, just a lonely rancher looking for companionship. What am I instead? Complicated, strategic, the way you handled Crenshaw, the plan for tomorrow. You think like a soldier, not a farmer. Wade set a plate of beans and biscuits before her. Spent 3 years in the cavalry before I took up ranching. Learned a few things about tactics and survival. And loneliness. That too. Amazing how alone a man can feel surrounded by 100 others. They ate in silence for a while, the deputy's quiet conversation drifting in from outside. As darkness fell, Wade lit the oil lamps, creating pools of warm light that pushed back the shadows. "Tell me about Devil's Rock," Dixie said. "Why there?" Wade pulled out a piece of paper and sketched a rough map. "Natural fortress, narrow entrance, maybe wide enough for 2 riders abreast. Walls go up 40 feet on all sides. There's a spring at the back, so water's no issue. Used to be an Apache stronghold before the army pushed them out. And you think Parker and Voss will follow us there? If we make it obvious enough, men like that, they're proud, angry. They'll see it as a chance to finish things on their terms. Or they'll smell a trap." "Maybe, but rage makes men stupid. They lost their boss, their operation, their future. All they've got left is revenge." Dixie traced the map with one finger. "What if they bring more men? Crenshaw had plenty of hired guns. Most rats flee a sinking ship, with Crenshaw dead and the marshals closing in. I doubt many will stick around for a revenge play." "You're gambling our lives on that doubt. Would you rather run?" She looked up at him, and he saw steel in her expression. "No, I'm done running. If this is where we make our stand, so be it." Later, as the night deepened, Wade found himself sitting beside her on the worn settee. The pain medication Dr. Morrison had provided was taking effect, and some of the tension had eased from her shoulders. "Wade," her voice was soft, almost drowsy. "What if we get through this? What happens then?" "Then we figure out how to live instead of just survive. Together, if you're willing." She leaned against him slightly. Whether from exhaustion or trust, he couldn't tell. "Margaret would have made you happy. She was sweet, gentle, everything a man could want in a wife." "Maybe, but she wasn't tested. Never had to fight for anything, never had to make the hard choices. You have. That's supposed to be a good thing. Out here, yes. The West doesn't care about sweet or gentle. It cares about strong and smart and willing to fight for what matters. Is that what we're doing? Fighting for what matters?" Wade thought about it, about the strange turns that had brought them to this moment. "I think we're fighting for the chance to find out what matters. Can't do that with guns at our backs." Dixie yawned, then winced as the movement pulled at her wound. "Should check the bandages before we sleep." Wade helped her to the bedroom, then carefully unwound the doctor's work. The wound was angry, but clean. No signs of infection. As he applied fresh bandages, he was struck by the trust she showed, allowing him this intimacy. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For all of this, you could have turned me away that first morning." "No," Wade said simply. "I couldn't have." Their eyes met and held, something passing between them that neither could name. Then the moment broke, and Wade finished his work in silence. As he prepared to leave, Dixie caught his hand. "Tomorrow, if things go bad." "They won't. But if they do, I want you to know, these past 2 days have been the first time in 2 years I've felt like a person instead of a weapon. That's because of you." Wade squeezed her hand gently. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we finish this." He left her then, returning to the main room where he could keep watch. Through the window, stars scattered across the desert sky like spilled silver. Somewhere out there, Parker and Voss were planning their revenge. But here, in his damaged home with an unexpected woman resting in his bed, Wade Langston felt more complete than he had in years. The deputies changed shifts quietly, professional and alert. Wade dozed in his chair, rifle across his lap, ready for whatever the dawn might bring. In his light sleep, he dreamed not of the gentle bride he'd expected, but of green eyes that held both sorrow and strength, of a partnership forged in gunfire and sealed in trust. Tomorrow they would face death together, but tonight, for these few hours, they had found something neither had dared hope for, the possibility of a future worth fighting to see. The morning came wrapped in mist. the desert air holding unusual moisture that turned Devil's Rock into something from a dream. Wade checked his rifle for the third time, watching Dixie move stiffly around the canyon floor. She'd insisted on riding despite her wound, and he'd seen the cost in her pale face and careful movements. Marshal Brennan had positioned his men well. 8 deputies hidden among the rocks above, rifle barrels barely visible, commanding perfect fields of fire into the canyon. The narrow entrance created a fatal funnel. Anyone riding through would be exposed, vulnerable. "They're coming," one of the deputies called down softly. 2 riders, moving slow. Wade felt Dixie tense beside him. They'd positioned themselves near the spring at the back of the canyon, visible from the entrance but with rock cover nearby. Bait and trap combined. "Remember," Wade murmured, "let them come all the way in. No shooting until Brennan gives the signal." "Unless they shoot first," Dixie replied, checking her pistol with practiced ease. The hoofbeats echoed off the canyon walls, each clip-clop magnified until it sounded like an army approaching. Then silence as the riders stopped just outside the entrance. "Miss Hargrove," Parker's voice rang out, cold and mocking. "We know you're in there. Saw your tracks plain as day. You always were too proud to hide them proper." Dixie started to respond, but Wade touched her arm. "Let them wonder. Let them worry. Come on out, woman. Face us fair and we'll make it quick. Otherwise, we'll take our time. Your cowboy friend, too." "Interesting definition of fair," Wade called back. 2 armed men against a wounded woman. "Langston, isn't it?" This was Voss, his voice rougher, tinged with pain from his shoulder wound. "You picked the wrong side. Farmer. Could have lived quiet if you'd minded your business." "Funny thing about quiet," Wade replied. "Gets old after a while." Movement at the canyon mouth. Parker appeared first, dismounting and using his horse for cover. Smart. Voss followed, favoring his wounded side but still dangerous. "Here's how this plays," Parker announced. "The woman comes out. We settle our business. You get to bury her proper. Otherwise, we burn you out. Plenty of dry brush in here. Smoke will drive you into the open like rabbits." Wade felt rather than saw the deputies shifting positions above, preparing. But something felt wrong. Parker and Voss were too confident for men riding into an obvious trap. Then he heard it. More horses approaching. Many more. "Did you think we'd come alone?" Parker laughed harshly. "Crenshaw had friends. Langston. Men who'd rather see his killers dead than face questions about their own dealings." Wade counted hoofbeats. 6, maybe 8 additional riders. The odds had just shifted dramatically. He glanced at Dixie, saw his own realization mirrored in her eyes. "Well," she said quietly, "at least we're not running." The new riders appeared at the canyon mouth, spreading out in a semicircle. Wade recognized some faces, hired guns from neighboring territories, men who lived on the edge of the law and liked it that way. "Marshal Brennan," Parker called out, and Wade's blood ran cold. They knew about the ambush. "We've got men watching every trail out of here. Your deputies try to leave their positions. They'll be cut down. So how about everybody stays calm and we handle this like civilized folks?" Brennan's voice came from above, steady despite the circumstances. "You boys are making a mistake. Federal marshals here on official business. Interfering makes you all accomplices to murder." "Only if you live to testify," one of the new arrivals said, "which ain't the plan." Wade's mind raced. They were outnumbered now, pinned down. The canyon that should have been their fortress had become a potential tomb. He looked at Dixie, saw her calculating same as him. "I won't let them take you," he said quietly. "Might not be your choice." She shifted, wincing at the movement. "But I appreciate the sentiment." "1 minute to decide," Parker shouted. "The woman surrenders, or we turn this canyon into a graveyard." Dixie stepped forward before Wade could stop her. "You want me, Parker? Come and get me, but leave the others out of it." "Dixie, no." Wade reached for her, but she evaded him, moving into the open with that dangerous grace. "That's far enough," Parker said, raising his rifle. "On your knees. Go to hell." The gunshot wasn't Parker's. High above, one of the deputies had seen something movement on the canyon rim where the outlaws had positioned their own men. The shot sparked chaos. Gunfire erupted from all directions. Wade grabbed Dixie, pulling her behind the rocks as bullets whined overhead. The canyon became a cauldron of sound rifles cracking, men shouting, horses screaming. "The rim!" Brennan's voice barely carried over the noise. "They're on the rim!" Wade looked up to see figures silhouetted against the sky, firing down into the canyon. The marshals were caught in a crossfire, pinned between the outlaws at the entrance and their Confederates above. "We need to move," Wade said. "Can't stay here." Dixie nodded, her face grim. Despite her wound, she moved with purpose, following as Wade led them along the canyon wall. He remembered every detail from wintering cattle here, including the narrow crack in the rock that led to an old Apache escape route. They made it 20 yards before Voss spotted them. His shot sparked chips from the rock inches from Dixie's head. She returned fire, driving him to cover. But more outlaws were moving into the canyon now, emboldened by their advantage. "Through here," Wade urged, squeezing into the crack. It was barely wide enough for a person, winding up through the rock toward the rim. Behind them, the battle raged on. The climb was agony for Dixie. Wade could hear her labored breathing, see fresh blood seeping through her shirt. But she didn't complain, didn't slow, driven by the same determination that had carried her through 2 years of planning revenge. They emerged on a ledge halfway up the canyon wall. From here, Wade could see the full scope of the battle. 3 deputies were down, maybe dead. Brennan and the survivors had formed a defensive position, but they were vastly outnumbered. "We have to help them," Dixie said. "We will." Wade studied the positions below. "But smart, not suicidal." From their elevated position, they had clear shots at several outlaws. Wade took careful aim, dropping one of the gunmen on the rim who'd been pouring fire into the marshals. Dixie, despite her wound, accounted for another. Their intervention shifted the momentum, with the pressure from above reduced. Brennan's men could focus on the outlaws in the canyon. The battle seesawed back and forth, brutal and desperate. Then Wade saw him, Parker, working his way along the base of the cliff, heading for their position. He'd spotted their muzzle flashes, was coming to finish what he'd started. "Company coming," Wade warned. Dixie looked where he pointed, her expression hardening. "Let him come. This ends today." Parker reached the crack in the rock and started up. Wade could have shot him then, but Dixie stopped him with a gesture. This was her fight, her demon to face. She positioned herself at the top of the crack, waiting. When Parker's head appeared, she was ready. "Hello, Parker." He froze, finding himself looking up the barrel of her Colt. "Dixie, should have known you'd make this personal." "You made it personal when you killed Margaret." "That was business. Wrong place, wrong time." "No." Her voice was steady as stone. "That was murder, and this is justice." Parker went for his gun, fast as only a professional killer could be. But Dixie was faster, driven by 2 years of grief and rage. The shot echoed off the canyon walls, and Parker tumbled backward, disappearing into the crack. The battle below was winding down. With their leadership gone and numbers depleted, the remaining outlaws were surrendering or fleeing. Wade saw Voss try to run, only to be cut down by Marshal Brennan himself. As the gun smoke cleared, the cost became apparent. 3 deputies dead, 2 more wounded. Of the outlaws, 6 lay still in the canyon, the rest captured or escaped into the desert. Wade helped Dixie down from the ledge, her strength finally failing as the adrenaline faded. He half carried her to where Brennan was organizing the aftermath. "It's done," she said simply. All of it. Crenshaw, Parker, Voss, the whole organization. It's finally done. Brennan nodded grimly. At a hell of a price. But yes, it's done. You can rest now, Miss Hargrove. As the marshals dealt with the prisoners and casualties, Wade found a quiet spot by the spring. He cradled Dixie against him, noting how her breathing had gone shallow, how pale she'd become. "Need to get you to the doctor," he said. "In a minute." She looked up at the strip of sky visible between the canyon walls. "Just want to sit here a minute, knowing it's over, that I can stop looking over my shoulder." "What will you do now?" he asked, though he thought he knew the answer. "Depends." She turned those green eyes on him. "That offer of partnership still stand?" "Always." "Even after all this, the blood, the violence?" "Especially after all this. We've been tested by fire. Dixie, both of us. Not many partnerships can say that." She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face. "From mail-order bride to gunfighting partner. Not quite what you advertised for." "False advertising goes both ways," Wade pointed out. "You're not exactly the gentle schoolteacher you pretended to be." "No," she agreed. "But I could learn, if you're willing to teach me. And you could teach me to be less quiet. Deal." They sealed it with a handshake that turned into something more, fingers intertwining, holding on like they'd never let go. Around them, the marshals worked to restore order to chaos, but in their small circle by the spring, peace had already arrived. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. Devil's Rock had lived up to its name, hosting a battle between good and evil. But in the end, justice had prevailed, and two damaged souls had found something worth fighting for in each other. "We should get married," Dixie said suddenly. "Make the partnership official." Wade blinked in surprise. "That's supposed to be my line." "You were taking too long. Besides, I'm not a traditional woman." "I noticed." He grinned. "When?" "Soon as I can stand without bleeding. Seems appropriate. Don't you think started with a mail-order bride arrangement? Might as well finish it proper." "Margaret would approve," Wade said softly. "Yes?" Dixie agreed, her expression gentling. "I think she would. She saw something in you worth saving me for. Now I see it too." As Marshal Brennan approached to help them back to town, Wade reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. He'd expected a quiet bride to fill his empty evenings. Instead, he'd found a warrior woman who'd challenged everything he thought he knew about himself and what he wanted. The twin brides had indeed ridden into his life, one in spirit, guiding them together, one in flesh, fighting beside him. Both had left their mark, creating something stronger than either could have imagined alone. "Ready?" Brennan asked, offering a hand to help Dixie stand. She looked at Wade, and he saw their future in her eyes. Not quiet, not simple, but real and hard-won in theirs. "Ready?" they said together. The morning came wrapped in mist, the desert air holding unusual moisture that turned Devil's Rock into something from a dream. Wade checked his rifle for the third time, watching Dixie move stiffly around the canyon floor. She'd insisted on riding despite her wound, and he'd seen the cost in her pale face and careful movements. Marshal Brennan had positioned his men well, 8 deputies hidden among the rocks above, rifle barrels barely visible, commanding perfect fields of fire into the canyon. The narrow entrance created a fatal funnel. Anyone riding through would be exposed, vulnerable. "They're coming," one of the deputies called down softly. "2 riders. Moving slow." Wade felt Dixie tense beside him. They'd positioned themselves near the spring at the back of the canyon, visible from the entrance but with rock cover nearby, bait and trap combined. "Remember?" Wade murmured. "Let them come all the way in. No shooting until Brennan gives the signal." "Unless they shoot first," Dixie replied, checking her pistol with practiced ease. The hoofbeats echoed off the canyon walls, each clip-clop magnified until it sounded like an army approaching. Then silence as the riders stopped just outside the entrance. "Miss Hargrove," Parker's voice rang out, cold and mocking. "We know you're in there. Saw your tracks plain as day. You always were too proud to hide them proper." Dixie started to respond, but Wade touched her arm. "Let them wonder. Let them worry. Come on out, woman. Face us fair and we'll make it quick. Otherwise, we'll take our time. Your cowboy friend, too." "Interesting definition of fair," Wade called back. "Two armed men against a wounded woman. Langston, isn't it?" This was Voss, his voice rougher, tinged with pain from his shoulder wound. "You picked the wrong side. Farmer, could have lived quiet if you'd minded your business." "Funny thing about quiet," Wade replied. "Gets old after a while." Movement at the canyon mouth. Parker appeared first, dismounting and using his horse for cover. Smart. Voss followed, favoring his wounded side but still dangerous. "Here's how this plays," Parker announced. "The woman comes out. We settle our business. You get to bury her proper. Otherwise, we burn you out. Plenty of dry brush in here. Smoke'll drive you into the open like rabbits." Wade felt rather than saw the deputies shifting positions above, preparing, but something felt wrong. Parker and Voss were too confident for men riding into an obvious trap. Then he heard it, more horses approaching, many more. "Did you think we'd come alone?" Parker laughed harshly. "Crenshaw had friends, Langston, men who'd rather see his killers dead than face questions about their own dealings." Wade counted hoofbeats. 6, maybe 8 additional riders. The odds had just shifted dramatically. He glanced at Dixie, saw his own realization mirrored in her eyes. "Well," she said quietly, "at least we're not running." The new riders appeared at the canyon mouth, spreading out in a semicircle. Wade recognized some faces, hired guns from neighboring territories, men who lived on the edge of the law and liked it that way. "Marshal Brennan," Parker called out, and Wade's blood ran cold. They knew about the ambush. "We've got men watching every trail out of here. Your deputies try to leave their positions, they'll be cut down. So how about everybody stays calm and we handle this like civilized folks?" Brennan's voice came from above, steady despite the circumstances. "You boys are making a mistake. Federal marshals here on official business. Interfering makes you all accomplices to murder. Only if you live to testify." One of the new arrivals said, "Which ain't the plan." Wade's mind raced. They were outnumbered now, pinned down. The canyon that should have been their fortress had become a potential tomb. He looked at Dixie, saw her calculating same as him. "I won't let them take you," he said quietly. "Might not be your choice." She shifted, wincing at the movement. "But I appreciate the sentiment." "1 minute to decide," Parker shouted. "The woman surrenders, or we turn this canyon into a graveyard." Dixie stepped forward before Wade could stop her. "You want me? Parker, come and get me, but leave the others out of it." "Dixie, no." Wade reached for her, but she evaded him, moving into the open with that dangerous grace. "That's far enough," Parker said, raising his rifle. "On your knees. Go to hell." The gunshot wasn't Parker's. High above, one of the deputies had seen something movement on the canyon rim where the outlaws had positioned their own men. The shot sparked chaos. Gunfire erupted from all directions. Wade grabbed Dixie, pulling her behind the rocks as bullets whined overhead. The canyon became a cauldron of sound rifles cracking, men shouting, horses screaming. "The rim!" Brennan's voice barely carried over the noise. "They're on the rim!" Wade looked up to see figures silhouetted against the sky, firing down into the canyon. The marshals were caught in a crossfire, pinned between the outlaws at the entrance and their Confederates above. "We need to move," Wade said. "Can't stay here." Dixie nodded, her face grim. Despite her wound, she moved with purpose. following as Wade led them along the canyon wall. He remembered every detail from wintering cattle here, including the narrow crack in the rock that led to an old Apache escape route. They made it 20 yards before Voss spotted them. His shot sparked chips from the rock inches from Dixie's head. She returned fire, driving him to cover. But more outlaws were moving into the canyon now, emboldened by their advantage. "Through here," Wade urged, squeezing into the crack. It was barely wide enough for a person, winding up through the rock toward the rim. Behind them, the battle raged on. The climb was agony for Dixie. Wade could hear her labored breathing, see fresh blood seeping through her shirt. But she didn't complain, didn't slow, driven by the same determination that had carried her through 2 years of planning revenge. They emerged on a ledge halfway up the canyon wall. From here, Wade could see the full scope of the battle. 3 deputies were down, maybe dead. Brennan and the survivors had formed a defensive position, but they were vastly outnumbered. "We have to help them?" Dixie said. "We will." Wade studied the positions below. But smart, not suicidal. From their elevated position, they had clear shots at several outlaws. Wade took careful aim, dropping one of the gunmen on the rim who'd been pouring fire into the marshals. Dixie, despite her wound, accounted for another. Their intervention shifted the momentum, with the pressure from above reduced. Brennan's men could focus on the outlaws in the canyon. The battle seesawed back and forth, brutal and desperate. Then Wade saw him, Parker, working his way along the base of the cliff, heading for their position. He'd spotted their muzzle flashes, was coming to finish what he'd started. "Company coming," Wade warned. Dixie looked where he pointed, her expression hardening. "Let him come. This ends today." Parker reached the crack in the rock and started up. Wade could have shot him then, but Dixie stopped him with a gesture. This was her fight, her demon to face. She positioned herself at the top of the crack, waiting. When Parker's head appeared, she was ready. "Hello, Parker." He froze, finding himself looking up the barrel of her Colt. "Dixie, should have known you'd make this personal. You made it personal when you killed Margaret. That was business. Wrong place, wrong time." "No." Her voice was steady as stone. "That was murder, and this is justice." Parker went for his gun, fast as only a professional killer could be. But Dixie was faster, driven by 2 years of grief and rage. The shot echoed off the canyon walls, and Parker tumbled backward, disappearing into the crack. The battle below was winding down. With their leadership gone and numbers depleted, the remaining outlaws were surrendering or fleeing. Wade saw Voss try to run, only to be cut down by Marshal Brennan himself. As the gunsmoke cleared, the cost became apparent. 3 deputies dead, 2 more wounded. Of the outlaws, 6 lay still in the canyon, the rest captured or escaped into the desert. Wade helped Dixie down from the ledge, her strength finally failing as the adrenaline faded. He half-carried her to where Brennan was organizing the aftermath. "It's done," she said simply. "All of it. Crenshaw, Parker, Voss, the whole organization. It's finally done." Brennan nodded grimly. "At a hell of a price. But yes, it's done. You can rest now, Miss Hargrove." As the marshals dealt with the prisoners and casualties, Wade found a quiet spot by the spring. He cradled Dixie against him, noting how her breathing had gone shallow, how pale she'd become. "Need to get you to the doctor," he said. "In a minute." She looked up at the strip of sky visible between the canyon walls. "Just want to sit here a minute, knowing it's over, that I can stop looking over my shoulder." "What will you do now?" he asked, though he thought he knew the answer. "Depends." She turned those green eyes on him. "That offer of partnership still stand. Always. Even after all this, the blood, the violence. Especially after all this. We've been tested by fire. Dixie, both of us. Not many partnerships can say that. She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face. From mail-order bride to gunfighting partner, not quite what you advertised for. False advertising goes both ways. Wade pointed out, "You're not exactly the gentle school teacher you pretended to be." "No," she agreed. "But I could learn, if you're willing to teach me. And you could teach me to be less quiet." Deal. They sealed it with a handshake that turned into something more. Fingers intertwining, holding on like they'd never let go. Around them, the marshals worked to restore order to chaos. But in their small circle by the spring, peace had already arrived. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. Devil's Rock had lived up to its name, hosting a battle between good and evil. But in the end, justice had prevailed, and two damaged souls had found something worth fighting for in each other. "We should get married," Dixie said suddenly. "Make the partnership official." Wade blinked in surprise. "That's supposed to be my line." "You were taking too long. Besides, I'm not a traditional woman." "I noticed." He grinned. "When?" "Soon as I can stand without bleeding. Seems appropriate. Don't you think started with a mail-order bride arrangement? Might as well finish it proper." "Margaret would approve," Wade said softly. "Yes," Dixie agreed, her expression gentling. "I think she would. She saw something in you worth saving me for. Now I see it too." As Marshal Brennan approached to help them back to town, Wade reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. He'd expected a quiet bride to fill his empty evenings. Instead, he'd found a warrior woman who'd challenged everything he thought he knew about himself and what he wanted. The twin brides had indeed ridden into his life, one in spirit, guiding them together, one in flesh, fighting beside him. Both had left their mark, creating something stronger than either could have imagined alone. "Ready?" Brennan asked, offering a hand to help Dixie stand. She looked at Wade, and he saw their future in her eyes, not quiet, not simple, but real and hard-won in theirs. "Ready?" they said together. 3 weeks had passed since Devil's Rock, and the ranch showed signs of renewal everywhere Wade looked. Fresh glass gleamed in the windows. New boards replaced those splintered by gunfire. And in the small garden plot beside the house, Dixie knelt among newly planted rows of vegetables. He paused in his work on the corral fence, watching her. The morning sun caught the copper threads in her dark hair, now pinned up proper like a rancher's wife. Her movements were still careful. The wound had healed clean, but left her mindful of sudden motions. Yet there was a peace in her bearing that hadn't been there before, a settling of something long restless. "You planning to work or just stand there gawking?" she called without looking up. "Man's entitled to admire his own property," Wade replied, grinning when she turned to glare at him. "Property? Is it keep talking like that and you'll be sleeping in the barn come winter?" But she was smiling as she said it, that real smile that transformed her face from dangerous to beautiful. Wade set down his hammer and walked over, offering a hand to help her stand. "Letter came from Marshal Brennan," he said, pulling the envelope from his pocket. "Thought you'd want to read it?" Dixie wiped her hands on her apron, another new addition that still looked foreign on her, and took the letter. Her eyes scanned the contents quickly, and Wade saw the last tension leave her shoulders. "It's done," she said quietly. "All of Crenshaw's associates, arrested or fled. The stolen cattle returned to surviving families. The investigation's closed." "And the job offer?" She looked up at him, green eyes thoughtful. "Still standing. They want me to join the marshals officially. Says a woman with my skills could be useful in certain situations." Wade kept his expression neutral, though his heart clenched. "It's good work, important work." "Yes?" She folded the letter carefully. "It is." They stood there in the morning light, the weight of decision between them. Then Dixie stepped closer, placing a hand on his chest. I already gave him my answer 3 weeks ago, she said. Sent it with the last supply wagon, told him I appreciated the offer, but I'd found something better than chasing outlaws across the territories. And what's that? Home. The word came out soft, almost wondering. Never thought I'd use that word again after my father died, but that's what this is. Isn't it what we're building here? Wade covered her hand with his. If you want it to be. I do, she laughed, the sound carrying across the yard. Which reminds me, Reverend Morrison will be here tomorrow. Mrs. Hutchins is coming out with fabric for a dress. Nothing fancy, but proper enough for a wedding. Tomorrow, Wade blinked. That's sudden. We've waited long enough, don't you think? Besides, I'm not getting any younger, and this ranch needs children running around to really make it a home. The casual mention of children stopped Wade cold. In all their planning and partnership talk, they hadn't discussed that particular future. Dixie, I know what you're thinking, she said quickly. What happened to Sarah and the baby? But that was then, and this is now. We can't live in fear of what might happen. You're right. He pulled her close, marveling at how natural it felt. Just the thought of losing you. Then don't. She looked up at him, fierce and tender at once. Don't lose me. Fight for me every day, same as I'll fight for you. That's what partnership means. A dust cloud on the horizon caught their attention. Riders approaching, 2 of them, moving at an easy pace. Wade's hand dropped automatically to where his gun used to be, then stopped. Old habits. Neighbors. Dixie identified them first. The Thompsons from the double bar. Indeed it was. Robert Thompson and his wife Mary, come to pay their respects and, Wade suspected, to satisfy their curiosity about his unusual bride. Word had spread quickly about the gunfight and its aftermath. Mr. Langston, Robert called out as they drew near. Miss Hargrove, heard you were making it official tomorrow. News travels fast, Wade observed. Faster when Mrs. Hutchins is involved, Mary Thompson said with a smile. She studied Dixie with friendly interest. We wanted to welcome you properly to the valley. It'll be nice having another woman nearby. I appreciate that, Dixie replied. Though I should warn you, I'm better with a gun than a needle. Good, Mary laughed. We've got plenty who can sew, not so many who can shoot. You'll fit right in. They visited for a while. The Thompsons sharing local news and offering advice about everything from where to buy seed to which merchants were honest. Wade watched Dixie navigate the social waters, saw her relaxing into this new role. After the Thompsons left, promising to attend the wedding, Dixie returned to her garden while Wade resumed work on the fence. The day passed in comfortable rhythm. The kind of quiet he'd once found oppressive now filled with small sounds of shared life. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Dixie leaned against his shoulder. Tell me about her, she said quietly. Sarah, if we're going forward together, I should know what came before. Wade was silent for a long moment, memories stirring like dust. She was young, we both were, full of dreams about building something grand out here. She laughed all the time, found joy in everything. First sunrise in the new house, first meal cooked on our own stove, first crop of vegetables from her garden. You loved her. I did, but... He searched for the right words. It was a boy's love, all sunshine and no shadows. When the sickness took her, I didn't know how to handle the darkness, so I hid from it. Hid from everything that might bring that kind of pain again. Until you wrote those letters. Until I got desperate enough to risk it. And look what that risk brought me. He turned to face her. Not the gentle bride I thought I wanted, but the partner I needed. Someone who's seen darkness and survived it. We've both got our ghosts, Dixie said, echoing his words from weeks ago. Margaret, you're Sarah, my father. All those families Crenshaw destroyed. But maybe that's what makes us right for each other. We understand loss. And we understand fighting for what matters. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring change vows spoken, lives officially joined, the start of whatever future they would build together. Wade, Dixie's voice was thoughtful. That first day, when I showed up pretending to be Margaret, were you disappointed? He considered the question seriously. Confused, mostly worried, but disappointed. He shook his head. Even then, something in me recognized what you were, a survivor, someone who'd been tested and hadn't broken. I almost did break, she admitted. After Margaret died, after I'd been running for days, I almost gave up. But I kept thinking about her last words, about this good man who'd protect me. She was right. She saved us both, Wade said, in her way. The twin brides, Dixie murmured. One showed the way, the other walked the path. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Mrs. Hutchins arrived early with Mary Thompson and 2 other neighbor women, commandeering the bedroom to help Dixie prepare. Wade found himself banished to the barn with Robert Thompson and old Pete, who'd arrived with a jug of whiskey and plenty of advice about married life. Second time's different, Pete observed, taking a pull from the jug. First time, you don't know what you're getting into. Second time, you know exactly how much it can hurt and you choose it anyway. That takes real courage. Wade thought about Dixie, about all they'd been through in such a short time. She's worth the risk. Good woman with a gun is worth 2 with a needle, Robert added, earning laughter from the other men. When Reverend Morrison arrived, they gathered in the main room of the house. Wade had expected to feel nervous, but as Dixie emerged in a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, all he felt was certainty. She'd left her hair partially down at his request, copper threads catching the light through the windows. The dress was modest, but couldn't hide the strength in her bearing, the awareness in her eyes. This was no blushing bride, but a woman who'd chosen her path with full knowledge of its challenges. The ceremony was simple, witnesses by their neighbors and the few marshals who'd stayed to see it through. When Morrison asked if anyone objected, Wade half expected ghost of violence passed to interrupt, but there was only peaceful silence, broken by a meadowlark's song outside. Do you, Wade, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Morrison asked. I do, Wade said firmly, meeting Dixie's eyes. As partner, equal, and wife. Morrison blinked at the addition but continued. Do you, Dixie, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, she replied, squeezing Wade's hands. As partner, equal, and husband. When they kissed to seal the union, a cheer went up from the assembled guests. Wade tasted tears on her lips and wasn't sure if they were hers or his. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful. Food appeared as if by magic, brought by neighbor women. Someone produced a fiddle, and despite her healing wound, Dixie insisted on dancing at least once with her new husband. As the sun set and guests began departing, Marshal Brennan approached them. Congratulations to you both, Miss Hargrove. Excuse me, Mrs. Langston. You sure about turning down my offer? Dixie looked at Wade, then around at their home, their land, their future. I'm sure, Marshal, I've spent enough time chasing justice. Time to try building something instead. Well, if you ever change your mind. I won't, she said firmly. But thank you. As the last wagon rolled away and quiet returned to the ranch, Wade and Dixie stood together on their porch, the same porch where he'd waited alone for a stranger, where they'd fought for their lives, where they'd chosen their future. No regrets, he asked. None, she answered. You? Only that it took so long to find you. She laughed, leaning into him. We found each other when we needed to. Margaret knew that, somehow. In her last moments, She saw what we couldn't, that the loner cowboy and the revenge-seeking woman needed each other. "The twin brides," Wade said, understanding finally complete. "One brought hope, the other brought truth. Both brought love." As darkness settled over the desert and stars emerged in the vast sky, Wade Langston held his wife close. No longer alone. No longer silent. The quiet bride he'd expected had become the fierce partner he'd needed. Their story, born in deception and violence, had found its way to honesty and peace. Inside the house, coffee waited on the stove, enough for two, finally and forever. The empty years were behind them now, replaced by a future neither quiet nor simple, but absolutely, completely theirs. Thank you for listening to this story. Where are you enjoying this tale of the Wild West? Please comment and let us know, so we can connect with fellow listeners. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Wade and Dixie's journey. Your feedback helps us bring more authentic frontier stories to life.